I'd like to talk to you about euthanasia and why it should not be legalized in the United States. This is a very controversial subject. It's one that most people don't even like to talk about. Studies studies have shown that in countries where euthanasia has been made legal, there have been changes in morality and even the value of human life. By the end of my speech, hopefully you will know more about what euthanasia is and why we should not legalize euthanasia in the United States. I remember being in a movie theater in 2004 and watching the movie Million Dollar Baby, starring Clint Eastwood and Hilary Swank. It's a lighthearted movie about a young woman named Maggie who comes from a poor background and just wants to make it big as a boxer. Then, at the end of the movie, it becomes this very serious film on the issue of euthanasia. What would you do if someone you loved asked you to end their life? I believe everyone has the right to die. If I were terminally ill or severely injured and no longer wanted to live, then I think that choice should be mine to make. But when euthanasia is legalized, that choice can sometimes be taken out of your hands. There are four different types of euthanasia, and there are very strong opinions on this subject, both for and against. But ultimately, I believe everyone wants a peaceful and humane death for themselves and their loved ones. But legalizing euthanasia is not going to guarantee that. Today, I'm going to discuss the different types of euthanasia. Next, I will discuss why I believe euthanasia should not be legalized in the United States. And finally, I will talk about how the legalization of euthanasia in other countries, like the Netherlands, has changed how people view sickness and death. Euthanasia is illegal in every state in the United States. However, there are four states, Washington, Oregon, Montana, and Vermont, that now allow physician-assisted suicide, which is different. There are four different types of euthanasia. There are active euthanasia, which is when you take specific steps to cause a patient's death, like injecting poison into somebody or an overdose of sleeping pills. And then there's passive euthanasia, which is when you withdraw medical treatment with the intention of causing the individual to die, as in a do not resuscitate order or taking someone off life support. So basically, the difference between active and passive euthanasia is that when with active euthanasia, something is done to end the life, and with passive euthanasia, something is not done. And then there's voluntary and involuntary euthanasia. Voluntary euthanasia is when a patient specifically asks for the action to be taken to end their life, or that the life-saving treatment be stopped, and with full knowledge that this will cause his or her death. But involuntary euthanasia is when the person's life is ended without their knowledge and consent. This is usually when a patient is unconscious or unable to communicate or too sick to be aware of what's going on. But although there seems to be a very clear difference between these two, sometimes it can be ambiguous in the courts and in the public opinion. Some points against legalizing euthanasia. Euthanasia opposers argue that the elderly and people with incurable and debilitating illnesses will not be or will be disposed of from society. The patients themselves may feel pressure to end their life as they don't want to be a burden to their loved ones and society. We also need to consider the mental health of patients requesting to end their life. If euthanasia became legal in the United States, just think about how many individuals with depression, schizophrenia, and substance abuse that could affect. There would need to be considerable pre-screening of the patient's mental status prior to granting the use of euthanasia. And would that always happen? Probably not. Another argument against um, another argument against would be in the age of declining morality and justice, that some family members may take advantage and misuse euthanasia to inherit property from the patient. This sounds horrible, but there are definitely people out there that would do that. And opponents of euthanasia also contend that doctors have the moral responsibility to keep patients alive as they stated in their Hippocratic Oath. They also argue that they can be a slippery slope from euthanasia to murder. And if we legalize euthanasia, it will target the poor and the disabled. And it could also create incentives for insurance companies to terminate lives to save money. In an article by Dr. Um, Herbert Hendon, a psychiatrist that was one of the few foreign researchers allowed to extensively research the euthanasia situation in the Netherlands, where euthanasia is now legal. He brings up many interesting points, one being that it's society's issue with not knowing how to deal with terminally ill and dying people that compels this cry to legalize euthanasia. Dr. Hendon believes that euthanasia is a way for doctors to deal with their feelings of inadequacy with their patients. He says by deciding when patients die, by making death a medical decision, the physician preserves the illusion of mastery over the disease and the accompanying feelings of helplessness. The physician, not the illness, is responsible for the death. Assisting suicide and providing euthanasia becomes ways of dealing with the frustration of being unable to cure the disease. His article also points out that even though there is many guidelines set up by the Dutch to regulate euthanasia, they still only get about 60% of doctors that report euthanasia cases. He also found that there are more requests from families and not the patients themselves. And also that these patients are feeling more and more pressure now to request euthanasia. It's my belief that legalizing euthanasia would not help our terminally ill and suffering patients. There needs to be more done to help these patients and their families through this unimaginable time. But in my opinion, legalizing euthanasia raises too many problems for it to be a viable option. Thank you.